Welcome, everybody, to the Seasons Leadership Podcast, where we are committed to leaders everywhere at all levels who want to make progress on their leadership journey. We will bring you actionable advice to improve your leadership and life today.
Thank you for joining us. At Seasons Leadership, we share a vision to make excellent leadership the worldwide standard. Learn more at seasonsleadership.com.
Welcome, everybody, to the Seasons Leadership Podcast. We have two great guests with us today, Celeste Ford and Janet Grondin, and we're going to have some great conversations. In fact, this is probably going to be two podcasts worth, so you're going to see that we'll break off at some point and pick back up again with these two amazing women. And so let's get started. I'm going to start with Celeste. Celeste, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Well, I'm always asked, because there's not that many women in aerospace, like, how did I get into aerospace in the first place? So I happened to have a high school that was really good in math and science, and it was a public school. So as you start looking for college, everyone says, well, you should be an engineer. And I didn't know what that was. I had no engineers in my family. And the more I asked engineers to describe what they could do, I didn't really still understand what an engineer was. But as I went through the college catalogs, because we didn't have internet back then, I saw aerospace at the top, and I said, wow, I'd really like to go to college and learn something new. And aerospace is not anything that was covered in any way, shape, or form in high school at the time. Now, fortunately, it is. And so I went into aerospace. I went to Notre Dame and then Stanford. And then I had 3 jobs where I worked for others, one in the international commercial, one in defense, and one that was somewhat of a startup. And each I learned something new. First, the technical, what it takes to, do an aerospace project, then about leadership, because I was working with Air Force people. And then on the third, all the contract kind of things. And armed with those 3 job experiences, I decided to start my own company, Stellar Solutions, and focus on really just the high impact things. Didn't want to be the next ginormous company. I wanted this to be a place where all the superstars in the industry could come and solve all the really tough problems that were out there. So that was my path to starting Stellar Solutions. And I was a mom at the time, so I'll have to say the mom factor probably played in. Kind of my generation, it wasn't expected that women worked. And so I felt if I'm going to work every day, it better be for something important. So I think that was also an underlying theme in my choices as I went on. And then after, almost 25 years of Stellar Solutions, I transitioned to board chair, started angel investing, and then started a venture fund, Stellar Ventures, which I'm deeply immersed in right now. So it's been a perfect next chapter to help the next generation of engineers. And with that segue, of course, I couldn't be spending all the time doing that if I didn't have a stellar CEO running everything at Stellar Solutions, and that would be Janet.
That's a great transition. Janet, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Well, thanks, Celeste, and Debbie and Susan, thanks for having us on today. So for me, I did grow up in an engineering family. My dad was an engineer. Grew up in the Midwest, and played baseball and softball, basketball. Was kind of a sports kid, and kind of got to the end of high school and decided I'd probably better figure out what I'm going to do for my career. And the Air Force was kind of calling me a little bit, and so I looked into it. And eventually ended up on an ROTC scholarship at Embry-Riddle. My dad was a private pilot, and in fact, he built his own plane, his own Starduster 2, in our garage while I was growing up. So I kind of had the aviation bug a bit, and went to Embry-Riddle in Prescott, Arizona, as an aeronautical engineer, and was commissioned in the Air Force in 1989. We had a short stint in pilot training. That wasn't for me. I think my mind, once I got into the engineering realm, that's what I wanted to do. And so I ended up spending about 26 years in the Air Force doing various engineering jobs, program management jobs. Most of that time was in space. And most of that time was in what we now call the Space Force. So when I was going through the Air Force, we had a kind of a small group of folks that really focused on GPS and launch and military satellite communications, infrared, missile warning. So all of those kind of more or less traditional or legacy missions. And that group is what is now called the Space Force. But I retired before the Space Force came into being. But all of those guys are my friends now. So, I work on contracts. We work on contracts for them now. But after the Air Force, I went to Northrop Grumman. I was a director in overhead persistent infrared for about 3 years. And that's when I decided I would like to make a change and join all those great people that Celeste was talking about. And I came to Stellar, and it just really was a perfect fit for me. I got to work the mission, but also work with, phenomenal people. And so after a year or so, became a director and then a VP and then CEO about a little over 2 years ago. We're all about solving customer critical needs while we realize our dream job. That's the vision that Celeste had when she started the company. That's how she ran it, and that's how I run it. And it's a phenomenal place to be. And I like to say I'm in a job I never dreamed of. So, which is maybe a level beyond having your dream job. So,
I
so
like that.
that's right. So that's the end of the story for now, I guess.
Well, we're in the middle of the story. We're going to pick up.
That's
where we
right.
left off.
That's right. I'm still living the story.
I know. I just have to say, this is, hearing you two talk about this, Debbie and I came from aerospace too, but boy, oh boy, you sound like you're doing some really great things. It's like, if we had a couple hours, I'd love to know even more about all what you're doing. I mean, it's exciting. It's exciting work.
And it's sustaining because we've been doing it now for a long time. But as Janet pointed out, our vision hasn't changed, and that's to satisfy our customer critical needs while realizing our dream jobs. So it has to be a critical need. It's not going to be writing a document that no one ever reads just for the revenue of it. And it has to be a dream job or bring someone in whose dream job it is. Because if you wake up in the morning and you love what you're doing, you're going to do a good job, and it's on something important. It doesn't get better than that. So the rest takes care of itself. The finances are your rearview mirror. But if you get the customer critical need and dream job and the right people, the rest takes care of itself.
One of the things we often ask our guests on a podcast is, what are you passionate about? And it sounds like you ladies are already answering that question. You're passionate about aerospace, space, customer critical needs, and dream jobs. But what else would you add to that you're passionate about?
Well, for me, I've got a new passion, which is a spin out of Stellar Solutions, which is Stellar Ventures. And I think why I'm passionate about that is pretty much all of my career until the very end, all of space was funded by the government. And granted, it's different government agencies. And one thing we always describe Stellar to make it easier to understand is the 5 points of the star: commercial, international, defense, civil, and intelligence. So those 5 buckets of people do space projects, but they're very different from each other. Intelligence is spy satellites and those agencies. Defense is your military support to your military operations. Civil, NASA, go to Mars, that sort of thing. Commercial, like Starlink. And international, because, hey, we're not the only ones in the US building satellites and doing cool things. So armed with that framework at Stellar, where you're working on all those projects, and with, again, a framework of that we cross boundaries. So there might be something super interesting and commercial that you could do in intelligence. And we as system engineers do that. So we grew up, but as you hit, those 4 points of the star, 3 are pretty much government, and international can be too. And really that was where all the money was for space. But now we've transitioned to a time where there's hundreds of billions of venture dollars going into space, and really good ideas, and almost the peer pressure of college of you should start a business, not go to work for someone, pulling at all our recent grads. So raising a venture fund where we can actually look at those. And I, again, have to give kudos to Janet and her team, because without their support, we would not be investing as smartly as we are. We actually go to Stellar Solutions for due diligence, for deal flow, and to help connect our entrepreneurs to government customers that they may not know about. So that's been value added and differentiate for our fund. And so my passion is really connecting those dots, and Janet and her stellar team are a big part of that as well.
That's a great place to leave off, because so what I'm really passionate about, the culture of the organization that Celeste built is really unique in our industry, to be able to come in and work on your dream job. And so where my head is at, and what I'm really passionate about, is taking advantage of the growth that is out there that Celeste was talking about. We've got some amazing, talented people that are doing amazing things today, and projecting out into the future. Well, what skills do we need to have to participate in the environment, the industry 10 years from now? I think I kind of liken it to launch. I would say 15 years ago, before SpaceX started really launching at the rate they've been launching lately, and returning their boosters to Earth and all of these other things, a lot of folks would say, launch will never change, it'll never get cheaper, there's a limit, and it's going to always be expensive. Well, SpaceX proved that wrong, and a lot of things have changed. Suddenly we do have an environment now where entrepreneurs can come in out of college, have a good idea, get it funded. They don't need the kind of money that you needed 15, 20 years ago. You really needed a lot of government money to get started. And now you can get started with venture and private capital. I think everybody still needs a government contract here and there. It never hurts. But those are the kind of jobs that are presenting themselves, tough problems, interesting problems. And so I'm really passionate about helping the Stellar team prepare for, execute today, but prepare for tomorrow, so that we have all the right tools, the right capabilities, and the right environment to succeed, in that time frame.
Yeah, I just get so many questions are piling up in my mind. But I want to go back to about this dream job. So, I mean, I know this is a crazy question, but because it's so much part of your vision, how do you know that you're hitting that? Like, do you measure it? Do you ask people? How do you know that you're actually, people actually are there and experiencing their dream jobs?
Well, since this is a podcast on leadership, we've kind of given you the details without backing up to how we lead. And I think, well, of course, mentioned, since I met Debbie through the Baldrige National Quality Program, that is a framework that I used for Stellar Solutions. And then our leadership team picked it up. We really did it for internal purposes, and then went external to be evaluated. But I feel like as a founder, everything I did was how I did it, right? And there was no, and of course, if I did it, I thought it was a good idea. So that was that, Well, as you grow, you need to adjust. And the Baldrige framework has, processes, but your metrics. So how do you know you're good? And one of those is the dream job. And same with customer critical needs. So the most direct ways, and Janet can talk more of the details, is you ask them, and then you compile that data and you look at it and you have accountability. And I think, that's one framework. The other is actually having that vision, so as someone who comes at Stellar, it's very clear. Dream job critical needs is the framework. Baldrige is your processes and metrics that support that, and then that you evaluate it. And I also say, and this is where I really just applaud Janet, is you also have to lead by example. This isn't just like some paperwork exercise or some pasty on the wall lovey-dovey saying that nobody gets. This is like, you have to lead by example. And for us, you don't know the customer critical needs unless you really talk to them, and you don't know a person's dream job unless you talk to them. And so we have important metrics around customer visits, which people see Janet do. It's not just for others. And same with the employee and team relationships. So I think that's really how, on the big picture sense, and Janet can probably talk more about what she's done with that framework to make it all hum with, 300 people instead of, what I started with, 3.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great way to tee it up. I think we have leaned on Baldrige quite a bit in this process because, early on, I think it was ask and you have a survey and your dream job, yes or no. Over time, we've learned that that even the concept of dream job has changed, right? So in the 80s and 90s, there was kind of like, oh, I'm going to work, 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 and then before I retire, I get my dream job. And really, things are moving so fast right now that we get young people in, and even mid-career people come in and they're like, well, I have a dream job and it's going to last for about 2 years and then I'm going to have another one. So we've had to adjust a little bit and realize that, the surveys alone that will give us one piece of information, but what we've had to sort of implement is more of and we all along, Celeste implemented monthly touches with our employees, and that is something that we do and we measure and we keep track of. But now what we do is we try to have more of like a dream job journey discussion about, okay, here's where you are in your development. What do you want to do next? And let's start looking for that opportunity, so because what we found is if we don't do that, then sometimes people say, well, I'm done with this dream job. And then they start looking outside the company. It's like, well, there's no reason to do that. Our whole purpose in life is to find you your next dream job. And so I think as a leadership team, we've really embraced the idea of having, ongoing discussions with our employees. And then, you sort of add that piece along with the strategic plan, which is something that every employee contributes to. So at Stellar, we do have a vision of what the future is going to look like and what's going to happen in cislunar and how we can participate and all that. But at the end of the day, when we decide what kind of work we're going after, we ask everybody, where should we go next? Where do you want to go? What's your next dream job? And then we, we'll kind of sift through all the inputs, and then we'll pick some projects and we'll go after those along with the employees who are interested in that. And it can take a while to go find those new projects, but we stick with it, and eventually, we find those dream jobs. So that's a long way of saying, yes, we measure it, but there's a lot more to it than just measuring. It's really, having a deep relationship with your employees and committing to, the vision and carrying it out.
Yeah, that's great, Janet, because I know one of the questions you had asked us to prepare for was actionable advice. So I was holding back on that strategic plan, but Janet teed it up nicely. That is really, I think, our secret sauce, is that we really do include everyone on the strategic planning process, and we tie it to individual bonus plans. So I feel like there is no ivory tower with a strategic plan that's decoupled from the working people, which is what I saw at the former companies where I worked. Instead, it's very dynamic. You have a bonus plan, we have a strategic plan somewhere in the company. There's someone accountable for pursuing these goals, and they came from grassroots. And they came from the people who are on the front line. So of course they know our current customer critical needs. And then they participate in the brainstorming of, gee, we've got our current customers, but like that cislunar stuff is coming down the pike. Who do we talk to get that? And in Baldrige speak, we call goal 1 our current customers, right size, right scope, and goal 2 our future customers. And we have the plan, but it also ties to individual bonus plans. And then these monthly touches with customers and our people are what Janet has a leadership meeting, and they talk about how to close. We call it a convergence meeting because we found we were doing a lot of this and we needed to do this a little more. And she's added all sorts of things that have, you know, really made the accountability crisper. And that's, I think, the fundamental thing that we do differently that's important.
I love that. Janet, you mentioned earlier, you touched a little bit on the culture. And what I'm really curious about is your feelings about leadership's role in the culture, the CEO's role in the culture.
Well, I think the CEO owns it, right? I think there's no question about it. You know, my view of the culture is you can work a lot of places, and right now in aerospace, for an employee, it's an employee-driven, you know, relationship between employee and employer. And so the differentiator for a lot of people is, some people is money, right? And, you know, and that's not the set that I think we really attracted at Stellar. It's really about, are you part of something bigger than yourself? When you come to work, are you respected? Can you be heard? Are you included? You know, do you belong? Do you feel like you belong? Do people care about you? And, you know, can you trust the other people around you? And I don't mean like trust in a deep integrity kind of way, but, you know, are people basically are going to do what they say they're going to do? These are the kinds of, you know, basic cultural attributes that I ask all of my leadership to really think about every day and practice every day, and really set the tone for the entire company. And when we do that, I think it builds on itself because, you know, people feel included, they want to be here, they want to come to work, not just to do their dream job and to solve the customer critical need, but also to be with people that they trust and respect and like to work with. And there's nothing better than that, right? Working your dream job, part of a mission that's bigger than yourself, and you're working with a bunch of people that you want to be around. So that's what what Celeste built. And as we grow, we're really fighting hard to not only, I wouldn't say keep that culture, I would say expand and grow that culture into the next generation. So yeah, I absolutely think the CEO owns it.
So I have a question. As you were talking about that, I mean, it sounds like a place I would love to work, you know.
I think you would.
Yes, it hits everything. As the CEO, are you running up against challenges to that? Like, is that hard to have that culture?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. It's, you know, it's, I would say the challenges are, for example, we have a number of unique benefits. You know, we have 9 weeks of time off, paid time off. That's, you know,
Nice.
incredibly generous, for example, right? And so, but I think when you have that kind of generous benefits, you know, at times you also have to, you know, people want to be able to do something specifically unique. You can't always do everything that's unique to every person, right? So as we grow, like we used to be able to do a lot more unique things early on. Now we're not able to do quite as many, but what we do is we step back and go, okay, what do we really care about? 9 weeks of paid time off is something we really care about, right? We have a very generous profit sharing plan, for example. And same there, you know, as we grow, we have some folks in the company who would like to have a little more cash than a little less retirement put away, right? So these are things that you can't please everybody because, you know, some part of your population wants more retirement put away and whatnot. But, you know, so we work through all of these things and really try to keep in mind the entire population, what's unique about Stellar, and how to make sure that everybody feels valued and included and has a voice in where we go. So no, it's not easy, but it's a challenge, and it's I would say a labor of love, you know. So
And in the early days when I started Stellar, I remember thinking, well, why would anyone leave? Because if you want to work on something new, we have a process and you can do that. And, you know, if you're any good, of course the customer will say yes, you know. So it seemed very straightforward to me that no one should ever leave, because you can always, in the strategic planning process, work towards aligning your current or future dream job into customer visits and tangible things. But as you get, you know, closer to 300, not everyone has that skill set. Not every program makes sense. So there are going to be some deviations. But I'd say the core culture that Janet was describing, that you're cared about and that we're doing great things together as a team, you know, still is there. I always used to say, you know, that saying that at every company there's 20% of the people doing 80% of the work. And I always said about Stellar, we're the 20%. So that you don't have to worry, like if you're at a Christmas party or something, that you're sitting next to one of those people that doesn't carry a load, you know. So I think that's another metric of our Stellar culture.
it's true. Yeah, I was going to do one go back on the challenge too. You know, one of the things that we find, especially after the pandemic, you know, a lot of we used to have more people in the office. Now many of our employees are working from home, and they're working remote. And I think the biggest challenge we're kind of looking at right now is okay, how are we communicating? How are people understanding and experiencing the culture? Because, you know, we're having to shift our mindset in the leadership ranks to realize that if you're at home on a machine, it's probably a completely different experience than if you're in the office with 20 other Stellar people. And so how do we make sure that every employee is able to participate and really see the culture? So I would say that's probably right now one of the things that we're really wrestling with, but we're getting there. You know, once you use the Baldrige kind of mindset, right? You take in feedback, and you kind of look at what your results you're trying to achieve, and then you kind of go through the problem solving process together and figure out, all right, what are we going to do about this? And so so that's something that we routinely do, and this year we are looking specifically at communication for that reason.
So I have to ask, because you're not the only one struggling with this remote, how to keep people engaged and connected. Have you had any breakthroughs?
I would say that we have relied on some in-person meetings that were always on the calendar. We get together as a company every year. This is something that, Celeste, I know you've done probably since year 3 or 4,
one.
right? Year one?
Year one,
Okay,
we had an annual meeting. It was part of the vision.
And we still do it. We just had our annual meeting in March here in DC where I'm at. And we had, you know, well over 200 employees join us with their +1s, some spouses, some moms, some kids. And we go through the entire strategic plan, and we reconnect, you know, as a team. We do some fun things. We had a party at the National History Museum. All that was really fun. But that's kind of a tried and true thing that we do. And then we always have summer or fall meetings where we get together in different regions. And similarly, we get the kind of a geographical group together every year. So we've leaned on those, and that's definitely worked for us. In addition, we've added things like what we call Stellar Talks. So somebody in the company, maybe they're an amateur astronomer, they come in and they'll do a little TED Talk like thing, talk for about 10 minutes about, what they know, and then they take questions from the rest of the team. So we've done some of those, which have been really good. And we've just tried, various new ways of communicating, and a lot of one-on-one. So we have, really doubled down in the pandemic and since, making sure that we're really following up, having meaningful conversations. So have we broken the code? I'd say no. There's more code to be broken, but what I find is we really relied on Baldrige during this whole time frame, because we already had our processes in place, we already had our metrics in place, and we were able to see where we were dropping off. And then we would sort of go back and say, well, how did we intend to do this in the first place? And are we doing it? And then a lot of times it just was a minor shift and a little bit more emphasis on, instead of emailing your employees once a month, you actually call them or do a Teams call or take them out for happy hours, that kind of thing. So it's a lot more touch, I think, is probably the main thing that we've changed.
And it's touch with a purpose that reinforces the culture. Like the very first year when we had our annual strategic planning meeting, there were 6 of us at a table creating the strategic plan in real time. Well, with 300 people, Janet starts, a quarter before the end of the year so that people can participate in these various in-person and Teams meetings to get their input and to get that really all in place. And then in the summer, fall, mid-course correction meetings, you can, focus on the hood that you live in. Oh, there's a NASA guy down the street from my super secret thing, but that sounds kind of cool. And you can just get to know each other better, which I just think is better face to face. And then the one-on-ones that are not optional with the leaders and their teams reinforces that. But honestly, there's no one size fits all. We say that, about our benefits and everything. There just isn't a one size fits all, because a story for why someone's working at home or why they don't, it varies. And you can't just say, well, there's one way to do that or not. We all found creative things to do during COVID, like the videos that Janet was talking about. And also she's created these town hall meetings. So not only do you have the technical space talks, you have town halls where people can learn more about the business operations kind of questions they might have. And one aha, again, I have to credit Baldrige, is, we had all these approaches to how we do it this way and this way and this way. But the big concept of deployment being important, like you can say you're doing all these things, but if you haven't communicated that or deployed it to all the people, it's kind of like you haven't done it, because if they don't know about it, they can't do it. And so we've really had to emphasize not just what approach we're taking, but how did we deploy it? And then what did we learn, and how do we integrate it with other things going on in the company? So that was kind of an aha moment for me anyway.
Well, I have one last question for maybe this section of the podcast, and then we're going to move into section 2. The one last question for each of you is, thinking about all your leadership experiences that you've had, and you've each had multiple leadership experiences in your career so far, what would you say, if you could only give one piece of advice, is a piece of advice you would give to leaders listening to this podcast?
You have to look at 3 things. I think you have to execute the work that you have. You have to really drive out the reality of your situation so you can act on it, right? So execution is kind of underpins everything else. And then you constantly need to be thinking about how you can evolve into the next, either your organization, your leadership team, yourself, into the future. And then the last piece is really, you got to grow. You got to grow. If you're not growing, you're dying. You're probably not just staying status quo. So you got to get yourself up and out and pushing towards growth every day, and try to expand your opportunities.
I love compound answers. That's awesome.
And that's great because I say, yes, you have to do all those things. And the final closing line would be reach for the stars. Because when you do all that, you have to, where are you going? And I feel like people sometimes sell themselves short of what they personally can do or what their organization and team can do. And so just think about that, you reach for the stars as you do all those things and really make a difference. And it doesn't get better than that in the leadership world and the world of that we all live in every day.
Thank you both for being here and having this conversation with us today. We'll take a short pause and we'll be back next time with a conversation with Celeste and Janet about leadership continued. Thank you, listeners, for joining us today. We hope that you were inspired by this conversation.
And we invite you to join our community on Patreon. See the link below. There you will find more resources to help you on your leadership journey.
Make sure to join us next time for more conversation about leadership excellence.